Very good. Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, directors and staff. My name is James Warren, and as the Corporate Legislative Officer, I will call this inaugural meeting of the Electoral Area Services Committee for 2021 to order. The first order of business today is the election of the chair and vice chair for the committee for 2021. I do have a prepared script here that I can read through, but I think you've all been through this a couple times before. So I can open the floor to nominations for chair, and if we do need to conduct an election, we'll do that. But I'll be opening the floor for nominations for chair first, and then for vice chair. So do I have any nominations for position of chair? Director Arbour.
Thank you. I really want to say thanks to Director Grieve for our first 2 years of the term, and I understand it's now been 6 years in the chair as the ESC, and it was also his birthday yesterday at turn a big day, so happy birthday to you. So we've had a discussion, and I think for a little while we've thought that it may be good to rotate the chair once in a while, and I think Director Hamir would be a great choice, so I'm happy to nominate Director Hamir.
Thank you, Director Arbour. Are there any further nominations for the position of chair? Seeing no further nominations, Director Hamir, do you allow your name to stand as chair for the EASC? Very good, thank you. Then I'm pleased to announce that you are acclaimed chair of the Electoral Area Services Committee for 2021. And I will and then I'll open the floor to nominations for position of vice chair. Director Arbour.
I understand that it was Director Grieve's birthday yesterday, and he's also been an awesome chair for 6 years. And I think to make sure that Director Hamir is well supported and sometimes challenged, I'd like to nominate Director Grieve to vice chair.
Great, thanks. And are there any other nominations for the position of vice chair? Seeing none, then Director Grieve, do you allow your name to stand as vice chair?
Yes, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Then I'm pleased to announce you as Vice Chair of the Electoral Area Services Committee for 2021. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Chair Hamir. So if you want to take the spot here, we'll just be a minute while Director Hamir gets set up, and then we'll get into our meeting.
Well, thank you, everybody. And first of all, thank you to my fellow directors for voting me in. Happy New Year to everybody. Before we get started, I'll acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded and traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. We have some delegations coming up, I understand. So first of all, a delegation on biosolids by Philip Lucas from the Campbell River Environmental Committee. Do we have Philip on the line?
Yes, I'm here, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for reminding me of that. It's been moved and seconded. All right, I will hand over to you, Philip, to go ahead and present. And you have 10 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Chair, directors, and staff for allowing me to present to you today. My name is Philippe Lucas. I'm a former Victoria City Councillor and CRD Director and a PhD candidate at UVic's Social Dimensions of Health program. The reason I'm here is that in 2010, 2011, we found ourselves in the CRD in the exact same position that you're now, which was with both staff and unfortunately, in some cases, self-interested engineering firms recommending a practice that simply didn't seem to make sense at the time, which was preventing a dangerous source of highly toxic chemicals in the form of biosolids from going into our oceans, and instead concentrating these same dangerous chemicals and then applying them to our local farms, fields, and forests. So today I'm going to share a brief summary of the information that ultimately led to the 13 communities in the CRD to pass a ban on the land application of biosolids on the entire South Island. Slide, please. So I want to start out by sharing some facts about biosolids so that we can, there's some things that are matters of opinion that we not agree on. So this presentation is going to be focused on facts. And the first one is that there are over 80,000 chemicals found in biosolids. Those include heavy metals, pharmaceuticals, endocrine disruptor agents, and of course petrochemicals as well from runoff and also from people putting stuff down their drain they're not supposed to. Next slide. And they also include PAHs and PFAs. And PFAs get highly concentrated in biosolids and have been found in milk, meat, and produce in the US as a result of the land application of biosolids. These are carcinogenic, they are highly toxic substances, and they simply don't break down in our environment. And we can also add microplastics to this long list because those are now found in biosolids as well. And unfortunately, only a few of these chemicals are tested for or regulated by the BC government. And the treatment that we're doing on biosolids all over the island right now is effective in destroying some viruses, some bacteria, but it does nothing to actually remove any of these other chemicals. And in fact, by removing water and concentrating them into sewage sludge, what we see is an increase in the potential dangers. We make biosolids more dangerous by treating them and concentrating them in terms of these chemicals. Next slide, please. I want to make it clear that the risks of land application of biosolids are real and unavoidable. And here's just a tiny sampling of some of the academic papers as well as reports that have been done by Environment Canada as well as the BC government examining the potential harms to human health and the environment associated with the land application of biosolids. Next slide, please. And since the risk is unavoidable, so is controversy and legal liability. And here you see pictures from the Nicola Valley First Nation and residents who are protesting the land application of biosolids from Metro Vancouver and the Okanagan. And they were actually successful in stopping the land application of biosolids in their traditional territories. Next slide, please. One of the challenges with biosolids, they simply don't stay where they're applied. Through wind dispersal, rain dispersal, which we're all familiar with, particularly at this time of year, as well as human and animal dispersal, biosolids have been traced through academic research dozens of kilometers from where they've initially been applied. But for the sake of the discussion today, we're just going to look at a 10-kilometer square radius, which would be the minimum amount of dispersal we'd expect from the current proposal of applying land biosolids on Ham Road. So this is a good aerial view of the actual area that would be affected by the land application of biosolids. Next slide, please. And here on this more detailed view of the project provided by Silvus, you see this 10-kilometer square radius once again. And you can see that this area includes all residences within this 10-kilometer square radius. You might be able to detect your own residences in this 10-kilometer square radius. It also includes the Black Creek watershed, the Comox watershed, the Oyster Community watershed, regional farms, fields, and forests, all aquifers, wells, streams, and marshes in the area, because of course these trickle into our waterways inevitably. The unceded Comox Nation territory as well, where they still do land crafting and wild crafting, etc. Next slide, please. So here are the facts that are uncontroversial at all about biosolids. This is not a matter of opinion. These are matter of fact. So the first one is that the land application of biosolids is not safe for the environment or human health. No academic study or report that's looked into the environmental or human health impacts of land application has actually ever found this practice to be either absolutely safe or without environmental risk, because it's simply not. Both the EPA in the US and BC's policies provide no assurance of safety. So you'll hear staff say that the land application is in keeping with the province's regulations, OMRI and otherwise. But in BC, we only regulate and test for a small percentage of chemicals. mostly heavy metals and some bacteria and viruses, and certainly not for the 80,000 chemicals that you find in these biosolids. And we don't test or regulate in any way pharmaceuticals and a number of other dangerous chemicals of concern. The second part of the second fact we need to agree on is the land application of biosolids is opposed by local residents, regional farmers, food security advocates, and First Nation bands, as well as environmental orgs. So the Dogwood Initiative, the Sierra Club of BC, the Island Organic Producers Association, and the Island Chefs Collaborative, the Farmlands Trust have all opposed the land application of biosolids. There is no public support for the land application of biosolids, and in fact, there is significant public opposition, and no consultation has taken place with local First Nations bands that may be affected and that's still wildcraft in the region. Next slide, please. Thirdly, the land application of biosolids threatens the viability of local farms and local food security. It's notable that all major grocery store chains on Vancouver Island and throughout BC have explicit policies not to stock or sell products tainted by biosolids, including Thrifty Foods, the largest employer on the island, as well as the largest buyer and distributor of island-grown produce. So if you have a farm in that 10-kilometer radius, you may not be able to sell your products, your farm products, your produce commercially. And fourthly, the land application of biosolids creates significant legal liability for governments, farmers, and regional taxpayers. This is a flashpoint of a huge environmental controversy throughout Canada and around the world. Sweden, Switzerland, Germany, and France and Holland have either banned or seriously restricted the land application of biosolids. The application in question would be on the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, and they have not been properly consulted yet. This information has not been made available to them. First Nation bands in the Nicola Valley have spearheaded a ban on the land application that remains to this day. And it's worth mentioning the municipality of Cobourg, Ontario, and a local farmer have been sued by fellow resident for the application of biosolids. And a UVic Environmental Law Society report from 2013 that I provided to all of you here today cites significant legal liability for regional governments and for farmers that proceed with land application of biosolids. Next slide, please. Thankfully, there are better and safer alternatives available right now. In the CRD, they've opted to send their biosolids to cement kilns on the mainland as a substitution for fossil fuels. And there are also a lot of thermal conversion technologies, such as gasification that yield syngas for fuel, valuable ash, and biochar for beneficial use. And it's worth mentioning that biochar is a proven technology that destroys PFAS and other contaminants, and that the province is already exploring a pilot program to ship Metro Vancouver waste to BC Biocarbon, which is a facility in Prince George, to turn into biochar. So the province supports these alternative approaches. Next slide, please. So what are the options then before directors today? You can proceed with the land application of biosolids, which creates inevitable risks to the local environment and regional public health, significant opposition from residents, First Nations, and environmental organizations, and a very high probability of both controversy and legal liability. Or you can explore pyrolysis and BC Biocarbon and other options, including shipping the products to the mainland to replace fossil fuel burning in cement kilns, that these meet provincial demand in regards to beneficial uses of biosolids. They eliminate all legal liability, public controversy, and reputational risk for the regional districts and farmers, and they reaffirm the regional district's commitment to protect the ALR, the local environment, and public health. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. And I'm happy to take questions if you have them.
Well, thank you. And we do have questions. I think Director Arbor is first. Thank you.
We've got feedback. Focus on
The backlinks are good. Turn off his mic.
There. Okay.
Let's try this. Thank you, Dr. Lucas, for your presentation. And I think it is a topic of that we have explored a little bit. And I know a few months ago, the question came up at our Waste Management Board. Staff had indicated, I mean, I agree that there's some risk, but I mean, what wasn't as clear perhaps was the level of risk and the potential impact. It's one thing to say that there are no studies that shows that there is no risk, but most things have a risk. So what is that risk? And in those applications, and I remember staff saying that it was a fairly minimal amount that ends up being in the environment. So it would actually be good to at minimum, maybe for our staff as a future action, to consider putting really good information around biosolids, because for a while we were talking about it's fine to use for agriculture, whereas we currently recommend it for basically for non-food applications. And another element of your presentation was saying that there is no public support for biosolids. Well, that's also a very ambitious claim. I think we do see people applying biosolids, and I think there's demand for it. We know a Skyrocket product gets sold, so I think that's evidence that there is some public support for the application of biosolids. So I don't want to dismiss the larger argument that you make, but I think I would like to see much more information around levels of risk and assessments, because I'm totally conscious there is risk, but if we start looking at biochar alternatives and things like that, then similar questions may arise. Like you start your presentation saying, we're displacing from ocean to land, the risk, but are we going to then move the risk from land to air? So I think it's I'm really glad you're exploring this and spending educating us around some of the risks. But I would love to see staff in the next year or so come back and even for our website, because the question does come up in my community and on even on the Denman Bulletin board this weekend. We were talking about this and people were saying, can you use the Skyrocket or not? And I said, well, from what I heard, you can. And but when they go to the website, there is not the depth of information around what are those risks, how much concentration of those pharmaceuticals are in there, and then discussion around the alternatives would be good as well. So anyways, just a little bit of feedback and thoughts. I really appreciate you coming, and perhaps this information could be fed to our waste management board as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you very much, Director.
Director Grieve, did you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, my first blush on this is that it's not really a local government issue, that this is Ministry of the Environment. And I've been told, whether they've changed the legislation or not, my understanding is that you talk about a duty to consult with First Nations. Well, that duty doesn't seem to be in this particular ministry's requirement list when they do this. In fact, my understanding as well, maybe you can correct me, is that regional districts only get kind of a cursory warning that it's happening or some kind of notification. We have no way of weighing in on it. And when you talk about liability, I can't see where you can have liability without authority. So maybe you can explain, at our junior level, junior order of government, why does this fall on us? And when we don't even have the ability to discuss it.
Sure, I'm happy to answer those questions. I think that the duty to consult is a duty for all levels of government. And obviously, as you noted at the start of your meeting, this meeting is taking place, and this land application of biosolids would be taking place on the unceded territory of the Comox Band. And obviously, there's a duty to consult in any decision that would have a significant environmental impact on them. I think we've all been witness to what happens when there is inadequate First Nations consultation on environmental issues that affect them, in the blockades that we've seen around pipelines, and frankly, the resistance that the BC government has shown to the federal government's decision to run pipelines through BC. And I think then under the same basis. Obviously, this local government and the regional district has a duty to consult if they're making decisions on land application of biosolids that might affect wildcrafting as well as the environmental sustainability of this whole region. I do want to point out that, it was mentioned earlier that this may not be impacting food producing areas, but I did read as part of the plan that's moving forward that there has been land application of biosolids done in Black Creek in a hayfield in an area that was a former dairy. Now, I'm not sure what they're planning to do with that hay, but if they're feeding it to cows, what we'll see is inevitably bioaccumulation of those harmful chemicals. And in the US right now, I provided you guys with an article from The Guardian, which shows that bioaccumulation leads right into the, and is found in the milk. And in the US, this has gotten so bad that a number of states have stopped testing their milk for PFAs because they can't find levels that pass the PFA limits for food. So they've simply stuck their head in the sand and stopped testing. So these harms are real, and unfortunately they're unavoidable. There's simply no way to stop this from happening and for this dispersal to happen. And so I think that both the duty to consult falls on all levels of government, but also the acknowledgement of the potential harms needs to be part of these discussions and needs to go beyond just what the BC government allows in terms, and I think that one of the things that you need to be honest with your constituents about, and on your websites or otherwise, is exactly what chemicals are tested for as part of the BC regulations and which are not, so that people can be well aware that pharmaceutical products are not tested, that other agents of concern are not tested. When I talk about biosolids, I need to remind people sometimes that we're not talking about human waste. We're not talking about urine and feces here. We're talking about everything that you find when you walk into London Drugs. Every single product there ends up going down the sink or down the toilet at some point or another. And when you walk into Canadian Tire and Shoppers Drug Mart and see all those cleaning agents, those also all go down our sink. They all go down and get concentrated in our biosolids. If it was purely a matter of human waste, of feces and urine, I think that it'd be a different matter. We'd only be worried really about pharmaceuticals that still get flushed through our body. But we really need to consider this beyond that. And as I noted earlier, when we dewater these products, we actually concentrate and make this more dangerous. We make biosolids more dangerous in terms of their concentrations of these chemicals of concern and carcinogens.
Do we have a comment?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'd just like to qualify a few things. And Mr. Lucas, the directors are merely stating that the example that you provided to them of the application of biosolids in the Ham Road area was on the basis of permitting or following regulations of a provincial authority, not the Comox Valley Regional District. So the regional district, it was not the biosolids that are produced by the sewage commission that is operated by the regional district. And I would just like to qualify that the relationship that the regional district has with Comox First Nation is a fairly good one. And the Comox First Nation does participate in the sewage service. They benefit from that and are working with this regional district to expand that further with respect to their access to that service for their lands, which does rely on our biosolids production. So I think that with that good relationship, it enables any actions that the regional district does take with respect to this and other matters to be communicated well between Comox First Nation and the regional district. Just one other small qualifier. I think you make suggestions with respect to the dairy farmers within the Comox Valley, and then you allude to problems and circumstances within the United States. And those are two very different circumstances and matters. Please to respect the farmers of the Comox Valley that are highly regulated and do undertake substantial testing of their milk products to provide a quality product to customers within the area, that they do not follow the same standards and practices of that south of the border.
Thank you.
Just to respond to that, I'm a local food security advocate, and that's really what got me involved in concerns over land application of biosolids. We have a unique situation here on Vancouver Island where, because we have been late in the game in terms of the treatment of biosolids, we have not done and actively participated in large-scale land application of biosolids yet, which is to our advantage and to the advantage of all of our farmers and all of the produce that's produced here on Vancouver Island, including dairy, et cetera. And that's what I'm here speaking for and trying to protect, both the livelihood of these farmers and the quality of our food products.
Great. Thank you, Philippe. I did have a few more comments as well myself. I wanted to just follow up on Mr. Dyson's comment about that application on the Ham Road area. From my understanding from speaking to staff, that biosolid product didn't even come from within the CVRD, and we weren't actually made aware, if I recall, that application was happening. So in some ways that is a concern. I have that concern that other regional districts going through the proper channels of contacting Ministry of Environment can have their product sent to other regions, and often those regional districts are not informed. So I think, you know, some of the, and what Director Grieve was mentioning, some of the lobbying, I think, may need to go up in the chain towards UBCM and Ministry of Environment about this process of not at least advising or informing regional districts when product like this moves into their area and is applied. But the other question I had for you was, you know, from your experience in the CRD, my understanding is the small amount of biosolids that the CRD was at the time capturing was going to cement kilns. I understand you have a new, well, the CRD, I should say, has a new sewage treatment plant. So congratulations to the South Island for not sending raw sewage out into the ocean. But the volume has, I'm assuming, considerably changed. And I'm wondering if that whole idea of sending that amount of product to cement kilns is even still viable. Are you aware, Mr. Lucas, of if that's changing at all? And are they having to look at other options?
The primary strategy in order to meet the provincial regulations around the beneficial use of biosolids for the CRD is sending it to cement kilns. And in fact, that has not yet started. It's only starting as part of our sewage treatment strategy. And so that's the plan moving forward that's been submitted to the Ministry of the Environment. It is interesting to note, by the way, that the Minister of Health, George Heyman, when he was head of the CR Club of BC, signed a letter that was sent to the CRD opposing land application of biosolids at the time. Now, of course, the minister is now representing the provincial government's policies, which do allow some limited land application of biosolids, but it also goes to show that depending on our lens and where we speak from, we can have different takes as to the relative safety or not of land application of biosolids. I also wanted to go back just for a moment to touch on the liability issue. I hope you'll all have a chance to read the UVic Environmental Law Society review of the potential legal liability to farmers in regional districts that might be supporting the land application of biosolids, because the impact in terms of reducing the value of land, as well as the potential health impacts on livestock as well as humans, is really significant. And this goes back to 2013. I would love to see that updated, but it may be one thing that you recommend to staff would be to get an independent third party to both review the potential harms and benefits associated with land application of biosolids independently, not coming from a potentially self-interested engineering firm who wants to move ahead with this, but also to review the potential legal liabilities and legal risks associated with this practice.
Thanks for that comment. Do we have any more questions from the directors? No? Well, hearing that, I thank you for your presentation, and I will vote on receipt. Any opposed or all in favor? We can do that since we're in person. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. And thank you very much again.
Well, thanks. If you have any additional questions, I can be reached at plucas@uvic.ca, and I'm happy to answer any questions that directors or staff might have. Have a great day, all, and thanks for this opportunity, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Our next item is the Hornby Denman Internet Working Group. And we have Karen Ross, Peter Spur, John Grayson, and John Wiggle from the Denman Internet Working Group to present information on the Hornby Denman Fiber Optic Internet Project. For receipt, set first and seconded. Thank you. And I will move it over. I see John and Karen and Peter on Zoom. Oh, I think you're all muted, so.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and congratulations on your election. Edwin, congratulations on your years of service. 6 years is a long time to have that responsibility, and I'm sure that Arzina will benefit from your guidance. And of course, good morning, Daniel. Nice to see you in chambers. Thank you for introducing our working committee, Madam Chair. Our delegation is here this morning to support the CVRD staff report being presented on the agenda a little bit later for developing high-speed fiber optic internet infrastructure to Hornby and Denman Islands. There's two parts to this process. The first is joining Connected Coast, which is the Strathcona Regional District and City of Prince Rupert Consortium, to bring rural and remote communities along BC's coast improved internet, specifically high-speed internet. And we're looking for landing sites. It's a subsea cable from Vancouver to Prince Rupert that then circles back around Vancouver Island back to Vancouver. Done in 3 stages. Stage 1 is Vancouver to Campbell River. The cable comes up Lambert Channel right between Hornby and Denman. It's taken a great deal of lobbying to reopen a completed file that excluded the islands in the initial application of 152 rural communities. If we get acceptance and get those landing sites, there's now 154. Many of those communities are Indigenous, and the federal funding is supporting rural communities of BC. The terminals, the landing sites would, in the current proposal, would be just south of the ferry terminals, the Denman and Hornby ferry terminals on Lambert Channel. The second part of this work that has been done is to support last mile infrastructure installation to every premise on both islands with fiber optic high-speed service. There's a very critical deadline around this part 2, and it's a hard deadline for federal funds, which is February 15th. So we need some decisions made in pretty quick order that an ISP will sponsor our communities getting that last mile infrastructure. I would assure the directors this morning that our local senior levels of government are fully supportive for our project. We've got political commitments from our MLA, Josie Osborne, and our MP, Gord Johns, that they will support the islands getting modern infrastructure for our internet, and that we can count on their support with the funders when we get an ISP to sponsor our communities. I'd like to thank Russell Dyson and James Warren in particular for their leadership on this file. I know when we've come before the EASC previously, the regional district staff has acknowledged that telecom is not part of their skill set, and James has made a heroic effort in the last month to really understand the file and come up with this very positive understanding report. So we're fully supportive of that work that's been done. Our ask today is the support for the directors to guide the staff in prioritizing a proactive approach in delivering the fiber to the premise infrastructure as identified in our January 20th report, the digital roadmap and implementation plan for Hornby and Denman. I think that you would understand how critical the timing on this file is in that the landing sites will be installed spring of summer of 2021. Phase 1 is Vancouver to Campbell River. As I said, it means that Hornby and Denman will be one of the first communities to get their landing sites. If we're ready to go with our funding and our sponsorship for the last mile, we'll be one of the first communities that could have that last mile infrastructure installed. So the timing on this is really critical around the February 15th deadline for funding, but also on the actual installation of the infrastructure. With 154 communities, it would be better to be, in terms of service being provided, it would be better to be at the top of that list and not the bottom. City West is a great company. They have 100 years of experience, but their capacity, of course, will have to be shared around amongst the communities participating. We'd like to be on the top of that list and get this file done and deliver the access to education, health, and all the benefits that improved internet will bring. You may have noticed that I was kicked off a little bit earlier while we were waiting for our delegation. That's what internet on Hornby looks like. Very difficult to conduct business when you're kicked off of an important call. So I wonder if any of the other members of our working group want to contribute any more additional information to help express how important this, the timing on this file is. Thank you, John.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to add one dimension in reference to financing. I've reviewed the Municipal Finance Authority Act and the Local Government Act, and these acts already have the appropriate permissions and legislation to allow the CVRD to borrow whatever amount of money it requires to finance the finishing of this project. And specifically under the Municipal Finance Authority, it's section 11.1. And under the Local Government Act, it's all right. Anyway, I've sorry, I just lost my screen. So anyway, bottom line, it's in the Local Government Act, it's Division 8, Section 275. And these sections specifically give provision to finance high-speed internet. And since ultimately this is a money-making venture that will be able to repay loans through subscriber revenue, borrowing money for 10 years and then having it paid within that 10-year period would work. So this is simply a suggestion from a layperson in terms of how to access inexpensive money that will ultimately get repaid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. John Weigel and Peter Spur from Denman are also here with our delegation. I wonder if they wanted to contribute any more additional information. You may have to unmute yourself, Peter.
You hearing me?
You might need to come closer to your mic. We can barely hear you.
Okay, but you can hear?
Yes.
Right. I'll just say thank you very much for having us this morning, committee members. We really appreciate it. Denman is quite excited to hear the CVRD's consideration of this proposal, which Karen, I think, has summarized very accurately. We're looking forward to what happens this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter and John. I think that pretty well, you can't imagine after spending at least over 2 years on this file, how this working group is so excited about the opportunity that presents itself right now. You know, a year ago, we had thought that the work that we had done with the digital roadmap, all the consultation, all the bringing our communities on side to have a clear path going forward for improving this infrastructure. You know, the funding had disappeared. We were looking for a champion to take up our cause. And, you know, it was a very hard time to have spent all that mental energy and time. And we're just so grateful that the regional district is in a position now where the staff are so fully supportive, and we ask the directors to follow their lead. So thank you very much for your time this morning.
Well, thank you very much too. I'm going to check and see if we have any questions in Director Grieve.
Thank you very much. Question more to staff. I know that we've kicked this can down the street a few times in different areas of the regional district. But I guess we're talking about that last mile being provided by a public-private combination service, or is it strictly a public service? And if so, have we done any rough figures on this, any thumbnail sketches on the costing? Because I'm thinking it's going to be quite considerable to be paid off over 10 years by a very small population.
I think James is able to answer that.
Thanks, Director Grieve, and to the directors. I do get into a few of these details during the staff report coming up on the last mile component. I think fundamentally an internet service provider, the ISP, is what is needed to be able to advance better internet quality in communities, in areas. And so like I say, I will get into this in a bit more detail in the staff report, and I think maybe that's probably a better place so that I can provide some context.
If I could, just a subsequent,
Yes.
I would just caution the island residents not to be too over optimistic on this. I know it's great to go ahead, and you know, there is some funding out there right now, and that's great. But as I say, it's that last mile that's the real bugger. So good luck with it.
And I think Director Arbor has some, no questions, comment? Not anymore, I think. I'm not going to guess what that was about. Well, seeing no more questions, I just want to thank everyone who presented, and I really want to acknowledge all of the time and energy that both Denman and Hornby have put into this. And thank you for your presentation. So seeing no more questions, I'll call the question on receipt. All in favor? And that's carried. Thanks again. Great. All right, moving on. We have a management report dated January 2021 for receipt. Okay. Moved and seconded. Any comments or questions on the management report? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And moving on to reports. We have the Denman and Hornby Island Internet Connectivity Opportunity Report dated January 5th for receipt. Moved, seconded, and I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and James Warren will provide a summary of the report and answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Russell. Through the CAO to the EASC. I'm pleased today to present the staff report, just a brief outline of the staff report and some of the considerations presented in it. The presentation from your delegation certainly touched on many of the aspects of the report and the project to date. A lot of the work does stem from the January 2020 report that came out of the work that Denman and Island working groups were undertaking. And so there's a lot of good material in those reports, and I encourage directors to look, if need be, at some of the detail. On Denman and Hornby Islands, the internet service there is suboptimal. There are some locations where internet service is adequate. However, for large parts of the island, it is suboptimal given the infrastructure that's in place. There are two opportunities that currently exist, and that is the first opportunity being the landing sites that were mentioned around partnering with Connected Coast and the potential to have landing sites on Denman and Hornby Islands. The cost to the regional district, based on conversations with Connected Coast, a subsidiary to the Strathcona Regional District, cost to the regional district to include those two sites would be $142,000. And that could be funds provided by Community Works funding from Denman and Hornby Islands. The alternative to not proceed with that partnership at this time and try to connect up landing sites after the subsea fiber is installed is more in the order of $725,000. So there's a considerable cost savings to proceed at this time with those landing sites. The second opportunity that exists is the last mile grant funding that's currently being offered through federal sources. And Those grant applications require an internet service provider to submit application, and the grant opportunity is upwards of 90% of the full cost for last mile funding. The recommendation of the staff report is to support City West, the subsidiary to the City of Prince Rupert, and the ISP partner with Connected Coast in making the application for the the federal grant funding, that 90%. The condition would be that the CVRD be able to support the 10% funding to make up the difference for the last mile construction sites. Also in the staff report is some of the considerations that we would want you to consider as we move forward if this is an option. And some of those considerations and research that we would need to do should these recommendations be supported is to understand just what would the service be that the CVRD would be delivering. Of course, we can't borrow money without having a service in place. What sorts of partnership agreements would have to be in place to enable the last mile infrastructure? What kind of tax impacts would happen as a result of borrowing funds? What sort of ownership of assets would be involved? If there are any assets to be owned in a project like this. So these are all questions that CVRD staff would have to undertake and present to the EASC to understand more fully what the arrangements would be. There are some principles that we would like to suggest that we keep in mind as that research be undertaken, should the committee support us going down this road. Fundamentally, I think high quality internet services is what the CVRD could be interested in providing. That's not a service that this regional district has undertaken in the past, and certainly there is a market out there for internet and high quality internet. So that would be new territory for this regional district. We would want to make sure that there's a full awareness of the full service costs for homeowners. So not only would there be a likely tax component, but there's also going to be other costs. For example, subscription costs towards an ISP. And then of course, balancing any future costs that residents and ratepayers may have to absorb with all the other service needs that exist on Denman and Hornby Islands and throughout the regional district for that matter. Lastly, I would also ask the directors to consider some of the, by supporting this activity, it does present some restrictions in our capacity and ability to deliver on other services that the regional district is either undertaking or understands there are pressures to deliver. Some of those other activities include the Hornby Island Arts Council, the transfer station on Hornby Island, some of the community facilities on Denman Island, and our park services. These are all services that either exist and have some pressures facing them in terms of increasing taxes and service delivery, or are services on the horizon that we can foresee there being pressures on. So while these two opportunities do exist, and I think there's good rationale based on a lot of the good work that's been done on the islands by Karen and John and Peter and others, there is some consideration to be given about some of the other pressures that the CVRD faces, and just really understanding what would that last mile internet service arrangement need to be, and some of those restrictions that would be put in place. So I think with that, if you have any questions, please to try to answer them.
And I did see Director Arbor with his light up earlier on. So I'll hand it over to Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the report. It looks really good. I would agree with the comments that a year ago, it looked like things might not align, but those two recommendations from my perspective is one of the lowest risk investments we can make in the next couple of months to look at these opportunities. First of all, something that maybe needs to be highlighted a little more in terms of the landing sites. A few years ago, the Hornby Island anyways was identified as one of the highest risk sites in Canada by TELUS in terms of long-term system failure and loss of internet. At the time, they had proposed a $1 million tower to beam internet basically from Qualicum Beach. It was turned down by the community due to concerns around, what do you call those things?
5G.
Yeah. God, the word escapes me right now. That's all we talked about for a year back on Hornby, but basically the emissions from the radar. So anyway, so no solution was found. And so the question is, in the event of a break in the cable of having our communities, we've had hydro down for a week in 2006. So similar things could happen to internet. So going back to this, the recommendation number one, even if no project occurred in terms of last mile infrastructure, those landing sites would likely provide redundancy to the system. And I think we understand, or I understand, unless I get corrected later, that TELUS would probably welcome that conversation around the value of those landing sites. So I think that investment is secured, whether we achieve the in terms of value to the community, whether we achieve the last mile and a whole other system without TELUS. In terms of number two, we have seen that Shaw and TELUS and the big corps have been not very interested in improving rural internet across Canada. We've received delegations. So in terms of partnering with our sister regional district to the north and the efforts of City West, backed by a $40 million commitment from the federal government to connect over 60, 70 communities along the coast of BC, I think that an application which we hear is both supported by our MLA and our MP and fits perfectly in the digital roadmap that we created in partnership with funds from Island Coastal Economic Trust and others. I think that an application going forward, answering some of the questions that our Deputy CEO outlined, would have a fair chance at a 90% for a 90% grant contribution for last mile. If we don't get it, it's a bit like the South Sewer. We're not going to create a service and pay for 100% cost of this. It would be astronomical to taxpayers. But I think at 90% grant, if a grant was landed, probably a service would start to make sense in terms of impact on residents. So for those reasons, I'm very supportive of recommendation 1 and 2, and I hope my fellow directors will be as well.
Any questions? Oh, Director Grieve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The devil's in the details, we know that. Even TELUS and Hydro charge for every telephone pole you string a line on, whether it's fiber optic or copper. So my question is, obviously the real impetus here is to get our foot in the door for the actual connection, the landing spot. So if we get 142K to get the actual connection to the cable, then everything else may take its own sweet time, but we've got the connection. Is that correct? It's not contingent on showing a complete costed plan.
I think there's the two-step process here, and the first step is certainly the Community Works funds to support the landing sites, which is the Connected Coast subsea fiber cable. And that would provide a landing site is basically it's from my understanding it's a hub located on land above the water, from which you can then connect fiber the last mile to, and that's missing right now on Denman and Hornby. And so that's the first component. First step is those landing sites.
Just quickly, so it's not contingent on having the whole plan. Right now, we can just put our foot in the door and get that landing site secured while the cable's being built, correct? So that's kind of a no-brainer, right? I understand. Thanks.
And Director Arbor?
Yes, to Director Grieve. Essentially, and I think we've heard, or I've heard some estimates of what it would cost to put it later. You know, they're laying out the cable now. And I think you would see quite an increased factor to have to retrofit and connect with the undersea cable later. And again, there would be some risk if there wasn't that redundancy value. I might hesitate a little more, but I think the fact that these hubs will actually help with the redundancy to the islands is well worth to me the investment. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I also had a couple of questions. So first of all, a comment that I fully support high-speed cable coming to Hornby and Denman for all of the purposes that were presented in the presentation earlier on. A huge economic development driver, having that type of connectivity. And for students as well, you know, not having the ability to do your online work is so difficult. So I think it will be a game changer for both of the islands in terms of who is able to then move and live on the island full time. So I absolutely support the funding for the landing sites. For the last mile project, you know, we've discussed the possibility of starting a service. So would staff be able to maybe just briefly share what that process would be? I'm assuming a feasibility study would happen for a service and timing around that.
Thanks, Chair Hamir. Yes. Anytime we look at a service, we want to understand the pros and cons, the costs and benefits of that service. So what would be the service that the regional district would provide? What would be the purpose? What would be the boundaries of that service, whether it's just Hornby and Denman in this case, or is there any merit or consideration of a valley-wide service? What would be the cost impact of that? And what sort of, before you get to the cost impact, what are the revenues that you need to be able to deliver the service? So all of that research would have to be undertaken to understand what would be the service that we would be providing. In terms of timing, I do see it happening fairly quickly because the grant applications for the last mile funding to be submitted by City West would be done, I think February 15th is the deadline for that application. Over quarters 1 and 2 of 2021, I see the background research being done to understand what is the service that we would be able to provide, what sort of limitations are in place, and also what sort of public engagement do we need to undertake to understand what the public's interests are. And then we would be in a position to be able to respond to the ISP should they be successful in that application. A lot of the work is also, we're able to piggyback on the 2020 connectivity research that Karen Ross spoke to earlier. They did do some public engagement, so there is some groundwork already laid there. But we would want to undertake our own to understand the public opportunity.
Right. Good to hear. Well, in light of the deadline, I'm wondering if a third recommendation is needed for that feasibility study, or do staff feel that some more time is needed to put that sort of proposal together?
I think the staff report already describes what the feasibility work would be, what kind of effort would have to be undertaken to understand the service and service delivery model. And so I don't see, I appreciate the support. I don't see that a resolution would necessarily be needed. We may need to come back to the committee at some point to discuss any kind of specifics around public engagement. And certainly service establishment is something we'd have to look to the public for as well. So at some point over the next number of months, we'd be coming back to the EASC with some of our findings and then likely some discussion on options.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, exciting, and potentially something for Dove Creek to think about too, and some of the areas that don't have connectivity here on this side. Okay. I don't see any more, or was that a question? Nope. So all in favor of receipt? And that's carried. So we have recommendation 1 is on the screen, that the CVRD support the installation of high-speed fiber internet landing sites on Denman and Hornby through a contribution of $142,000 to the Strathcona Regional District that's going to be funded through the Denman and Hornby Island Community Works Funds. First and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Recommendation 2 has been moved and seconded. That the Comox Valley Regional District Board support City West in applying to any and all provincial and federal programs for the construction of last mile fiber projects on Denman and Hornby, and further that the board consider funding beyond the 90% threshold subject to an assessment of a CVRD service delivery model to support broadband connectivity, including public engagement prior to any formal commitments being established. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried as well. Thank you. Moving on, away from fiber optics and internet to mosquitoes. We have the Saratoga Beach Mosquito Management Service Establishment for receipt. Moved and seconded. And over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Doug DeMarzo is here to present his report and discuss the recommendations and answer any of your questions.
Thank you through the chair and directors. I'd just like to take a brief moment to introduce Curtis Fadouk from Environmental Services, Duca Environmental Services. He will be available at the end of the presentation to answer any questions. Just quickly note that Duca did prepare the report in this staff report at the end of the, as attached, and they have extensive experience in integrated pest management, specializing in mosquito and biting fly surveillance management. Since 1986, they have provided both nuisance and West Nile virus vector mosquito population surveillance, sampling, development site mapping, and control services to over 60 communities, regional districts, and provincial agencies. So if that'll get started on the presentation, we're here to provide details regarding a mosquito management service for mosquito control in the Saratoga Beach area to be included within the 2021 singular alternative approval process. As you may be familiar, this has been before the EISC a few times since 2015 in various forms, including most recently in November with the singular AAP process. As we move forward to slide 2, it just outlines the boundaries that were established. And this is generally established on areas over the years that have been around the complaints brought forward and studies that have been based on gathering the evidence over the years. So it's about 600 residents and really defines that Saratoga Beach area back to the Inland Island Highway, including the CB Road and around the provincial park at Miracle Beach. So as we move on to slide 3, really focuses again on that study. And I'll just go over a few of the study highlights. The field collection was done between April and July last year. The obvious, the Aedes dorsalis is the salt marsh mosquito, turned out to be the predominant mosquito on that site. About 88% of larval and adult specimens collected were this mosquito. Additional specimens included Aedes provaricans, Aedes stichicis, and the Culex mosquito. Pardon my Latin there. On the coast, the Aedes mosquitoes more or less develop all season long, hatching with each successive high tide and resultant water accumulation as they rise and go down in each area. So depending on the tides and the depth of the water in the bank, they could be hatching at any given time. Also, rainfall plays a factor in that. And adults can disperse from their source for several kilometers. And the Aedes in particular, they're pretty vicious biters both day and night out of the species of mosquitoes that are regularly found in BC. So moving on to slide 4. The objective of a mosquito nuisance control program is to reduce the extent of adult mosquito annoyance. So it should be clear here that throughout, the Saratoga fact finding, it was really found that there is an annoyance level with the mosquitoes. We're not trying to treat a transferable disease necessarily through mosquitoes. This is best obviously accomplished through an implementation of an integrated approach to reducing the overall mosquito populations with a focus on larval control. So by doing this, you really integrate an integrated pest management program which you're familiar with from other types of processes. And it's about the elimination or modification of habitat, which we have quite a bit of information on the website about that. Control of the larvae through predators or biological larvicides, which we'll get into a little bit more. Here is the BTI larvicide, which is a common control method used by consultants to control mosquito populations. And then, of course, if you're applying a larvicide of any type, you have to go through the provincially approved pest management plan requirements, and those require provincial approval, and they have a consultation process outlined that we have to follow, which would probably get underway depending on the end of this meeting and the proposed process moving forward. So finally, moving ahead on slide 5 is looking at some of the budget numbers. We did this number on a rough parcel tax calculation, which isn't the recommended process of tax requisition, but it was to give you a rough idea, be about $50 per household. And really, legislative services will be coming forward in February, looking at the whole single area AP processes and provide the finalized financing at that time. And our control program, we envision it not being taken by staff internally, but rather by a certified consultant, and likely to work underneath of the Parks Department as overseeing the project moving forward. And then finally on slide 6, I've mentioned the the PMP process has already been somewhat underway. Some KFN engagement has been done, as well as other First Nations. And the real public engagement plan leading up to the AP looks at reaching out to the community via websites, your electoral areas, newsletters, and other methods. And really, the process and the establishment of the service wouldn't be until the 2022 budget year. So there is a potential rural community grant opportunity potentially for Sambra if there is a need to deliver the process this summer. Sambra is in agreement of, kind of overseeing the management of it for 1 year, but not something they want to take on long term. And finally, I think very importantly, the proposed service is specific to mosquitoes here. It applies only to the defined service area outlined on slide 2 regarding the boundary, and doesn't currently include any consideration of any other resources. So it's being delivered for this cost, for this purpose. And there is a risk here that we're opening up to additional demand, which we do not have the resources for. You may recall in Area B, even at a time, there was a mosquito project looking at not Kinbeach, Kai Bay area there. So there, we don't know what's out there as far as invasive species. So there's additional demand. So an option here could also be to reflect on a larger service and ask staff to look back at that. So a number of issues out there. With that, I think we have Curtis online for any technical questions, and myself will hopefully be able to answer any other questions you may be able to ask.
Questions from the directors? Dr. Grieve?
Thanks, Madam Chair. So we're looking at hanging tight until 2022 to actually get the service up and running. We've done all of the baseline work, or Curtis has, with his company, and we have property owners right now who are able to purchase the BTI on their own and treat their own property. But when we get that pest management plan before the province, we're looking to have all that done, say, by 2021, as well as establish the service. And my question really is there any action we can take, maybe working through the Saratoga Miracle Beach Residents Association to help the property owners right now with this year's impending infestation, or are they sort of on their own?
I'll defer a bit of this to Curtis, but my understanding is, the property owners will still have an opportunity to purchase BTI and treat their own property. So that option still remains available. And this service is really about public properties. So that's a key distinction, the PMP service. And
this way we'd have the school district and parks and MOTI on board once we get that approved through the province.
The PMP will allow those partners to come into the fold. They'll each have to make their own distinction for all their own lands, and we'll put it out to them and provide that opportunity to be available to them. Curtis, did you want to comment a little bit more?
Yeah, if I could. Thank you very much to the board and chairman. Thank you for having me today. As Doug has mentioned, it is the public property that the pest management plan would cover. So although individuals can purchase some Vectovac for home use, they're not really able to treat the area that is generating probably 95% of the mosquitoes. Some of them may have flooding into their own properties, but the great portion of it all is contained within that one. I guess it's an old back channel, an old beachhead or something, from 10, 20,000 years ago. That's still low enough that it receives seepage water, and now it gets direct flooding through some culverts. So it does generate a fair bit of mosquitoes. And again, with the PMP in place, and I understand if Sambra is able to provide some funding, we could certainly go in and do the treatments for them, and it would all be approved above board. And again, if any of the highways or other groups would want to get involved, the parks and stuff, they could certainly join in easily enough, which is chatting with us and having us come through and start doing some surveys.
Just further to that then, so there is an opportunity for to work through the area association for some preliminary work. I'm just wondering, all the sampling you've done so far, is it fairly complete now? Do we have all the information you need?
Yeah, I would say we definitely focused on what was generating the sources of the nuisance, and that was the Aedes dorsalis, as Doug mentioned. And those are salt marsh mosquitoes. So the focus was in trying to define the actual scope, how big an area, how frequently are the mosquitoes developing there. And as Doug mentioned, every time we have a high tide, I think it's over 17 feet or 14 feet, as it's measured at Middle Natch, that causes sufficient flooding for mosquito development. Mosquitoes also use freshwater habitat, and there's a lot of fresh water that moves around through Saratoga Beach, I noticed when I was there, but a lot of it is flowing. And we didn't find a lot of freshwater type mosquito development there. There were a few culex, but once you have an operational program and you're in the community, every 7 days or every 10 days, depending on the cycle with the tides, we're more than likely going to find other sites and smaller sources. But definitely the big problem is that slough that comes back through there. And that's not to say, again, there might not be a pond in behind, Mrs. Brown's backyard, which we don't know exists until she becomes aware, there's a mosquito program, we can have some service. Then certainly we would go and investigate their property. And that's what typically happens is with a lot of mosquito programs is in the first 2-3 years, they grow a little bit, if you will, as these other sites are established or found. And then what happens over time, as you carry on with your annual program, you start to suppress the population so that after, typically 3 to 4 to 5 years, we see what would normally be a mosquito sample of 100 or 200 larvae in a dipper. We might see that be down to as low as 10 or 15 larvae per dip now. So it's kind of like an egg bank. The eggs are laid on the soil and they're good for upwards of 20 years. So it's kind of like a bank account, every time that you put some money in the bank, you take some money out, but you don't put any more back in. And that's what's happening with mosquito control. Every time those larvae are controlled, they don't become adults, they don't lay 300 eggs. So after 5 or 6 years of hatching and control, you start depleting this bank account of eggs, if you will. And that's why after 5 or 6 or 7 years, again, we have some programs that have been operating for over 30 years now. And the larvae are just, the dip counts are very, very low. So if you do have a situation where maybe something isn't completely treated, or maybe there's some flooding into an area that hasn't been flooded before or hasn't been flooded recently, it's not thousands and millions of mosquitoes that come out of those areas. It's a much smaller number. So again, it's like mowing lawns again. It's a maintenance type of approach. You don't mow the lawns after a while, it looks pretty crummy. You keep on top of it and they always look well. It's the same thing with mosquito control programs. Once they're established, it's something that usually people have them because they need them. It's definitely not a prestige item to have a mosquito control program. It's usually generated because the public or businesses, if you have a patio and you're trying to have people out for drinks or something, if you're a pub, it can be pretty economically impinging.
Well, thank you very much, Curtis. And on a personal note, I'd like to thank you for, on a personal level, for taking such an interest and working so well with the area association. So,
you're very welcome. I really enjoy it. You get to meet a lot of neat people and see a lot of beautiful parts of BC for sure.
I don't see quite, well, I have one question, if that's possible. Sure. Just regarding the area and coverage, I note that we have an upcoming presentation from the Ministry of Environment on gypsy moth control, which they're doing aerially, but It sounds like you're actually spraying by hand, like manually. Would aerial be a possibility, or is it, I'm hearing culverts, so that's probably something that can't be hit by an aerial application.
No, it'd be pretty tough. I mean, the area that we're talking about is only 10 to 20, maybe 30 meters wide. It's well over a kilometer long. But again, it's this long snaking kind of a slough. And certainly it could be treated by air, but we wouldn't economically, it's just not justified at $1,400 to $1,700 an hour. And the gypsy moth and mosquito programs are different. The gypsy moth program, they're trying to eradicate something. In the mosquito program, we don't make any proposals. We don't guarantee anybody that we're going to eradicate mosquitoes. That's impossible. They've been around for 200 million years, and they're still going to be around. But we're trying to suppress that population. So again, we're focusing in the area of Saratoga Beach. It'd all be ground treatments. The gypsy moth program, it uses a similar product. It uses BTK, Bacillus thuringiensis kerstaki, and I've been involved with those since 1984. I did some of the first helicopter spraying with Okanagan helicopters in Courtenay, BC. And I've done some monitoring up in Hope and stuff. So I'm pretty familiar with their programs as well. I didn't realize you were having one up there. I know they do one in Surrey every year. And the key, again, what they're trying to do is they're trying to eradicate something they don't want. So they're trying to treat an area by area and get maximum surface coverage. They tried doing it from the ground in Delta back in, would have been early 2000s. And it was really difficult to get good leaf coverage. And you're also trying to spray 100 feet up into the air from the ground. So there was concerns with overspray and inadequate surface coverage. And they found that, especially for the gypsy moth, doing it by plane, it's typically what they use is the best way to get a uniform coverage, and usually end up using the least amount that you need to treat an area doing it that way. So it's definitely from an economic or an environmental standpoint, you're using the minimum amount that you would need to affect control.
Great, thank you. I don't see any more questions, so I'll call the question on receipt. All in favor? And that's carried. And we have a recommendation. The recommendation that the board support the advancement of the Saratoga Mosquito Management Service Establishment Project as generally outlined in the staff report dated January 8th, 2021. And further, that staff be directed to bring forward the necessary service establishment bylaw and related legislative requirements for consideration of readings and inclusion with the singular alternative approval process to seek participating area approval. That's moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. Here's the fewer mosquitoes in Miracle Beach and,
Yes,
and
I
Saratoga.
hope so. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll keep in touch with Doug. Thank you.
Welcome, thanks.
Bye-bye.
How's everybody feeling? Do you want a leg stretch or do you want to carry on?
Pass up a break.
Okay. Yeah, 5-minute leg stretch, and then we'll be back. All right, I think we're back to order and ready to move on. The next item on the agenda is the new electoral area community halls service. There's a report dated January 7th for receipt. Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Dr. Marzo will present this report and answer any of your questions.
Thank you through the chair to directors. Once again, this will be a very brief overview. The purpose of this report is to outline a process to provide consistent and stable funding to the community halls. To date, with the exception of the Islands and Black Creek, funding has been requested regularly through the former GIA process for these halls. Again, this has been in front of the board a few times now in various forms and is along the continued progress path to a singular AAP process. Of interest of this one is the service boundaries. Baden Sound Electoral Area A being presented as one of the service boundaries, I think is pretty self-explanatory. The second boundary is a combination of Electoral Area B and C, and both of them have exceptions, with except those properties south of Ryan Road in Area B, and except those properties south of the Puntledge River in Area C. This is primarily because those properties tend to access some other municipal services, or we'd see them using those community halls instead of the rural community halls. So we felt this as an appropriate boundary adjustment, and of course, we're open to your comments and observations on that. Finally, not finally, but as we move forward, we're looking at a budget, and throughout the process, we've looked at the budgeting process through the GIA and through the Black Creek Hall in the past. And our intention is really to offset the former GIA requests, build a tiny bit of capital into it. And of course, by doing this, being able to respond to the community needs consistently throughout. So it's really just an offset of that. You will see the numbers in Area BC are a bit higher than you may have been alluded to in formal staff reports. And that's because during the budget process in February or January 25th, you'll see an increase that Black Creek Hall is suggested, but we'll get into those details specifically with Black Creek Hall later on. So you're basically looking between 37,000 and 39,000 for Area A and 123 to 125 for the portions of Area B and C. And as we move forward, we'll go through the Ledge Services AAP process, similar to the other singular AAP process outlined. Include public engagement, which we've already done a fair bit of public engagement with the community halls themselves, just mostly due through COVID. This has always been one of the background topics with those community halls that have attended the COVID meetings, as we keep them updated on the PHOs and share knowledge and ideas on how to respond to COVID. So this has been at the forefront of those conversations and distributed in the minutes. And then move into the AAP service with, again, 2022, looking for the new service establishments. So for 2021, they would be going through the now rural grant process to continue along that path. And then 2022, service would be established. And this really provides consistency to those community halls, knowing that, you know, there's an ongoing service and commitment to community halls in the region to provide those services that are so critical to the community, reducing travel and everything else to the main hub centers. A couple of options are presented in the report, which I won't go into detail in. I think I'll just turn this over for questions at this point.
Thank you. Any questions from directors? I see Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Doug, for your work too, as well, through the COVID era. Lots of positive feedback about support from CVRD and conversations with the various halls and committees on across Area A anyways. And yeah, this one makes total sense to me in terms of we've been providing grants on a fairly regular basis to those halls, but I think with stability of funding that will allow them to embark on processes like we do here, you know, to better consider asset management, all these different things. And we have a lot of old infrastructure in those halls, and they are key to those communities. They're all very well used for a variety of purposes, and often serve as a bit of the heartbeat of the community. It hasn't been the case this year, but I think it'd be quite uplifting to get this going and to provide that show of support. And I guess in terms of the EAP, we'll have to consider all kinds of things, the maximum requisition, all those things. But I think we currently have 3 that are on serviced, Black Creek, Hornby, and Denman. And I think the other 6 or 7 will, in my area anyways, there's a lot of interest and support for it. So I expect that the public will be quite receptive. And I think the EAP process is the right approach for that. So thanks.
And Director Grieve?
Thank you. All kinds of questions. I know that we're basically taking the Black Creek community service and expanding it. And obviously they're aware of what we're doing, but then it's not really impacting them because they're still getting in fact, they're going to be getting their 5-year bump we were talking about earlier. It's time for their raise. So I'm wondering a couple of things. So the service, rather than doing the 5-year bump, is it going to have built in like a 2% per year cost of living kind of an increase or something like that? Because insurance rates and gas bills, hydro, all that stuff keeps going up. And, we're more into just life support. None of this money's really going to make a huge difference. It's, might buy them a few gallons of paint. That's about it. So are we working something in to accommodate for cost of living, or would they have to come back and ask for an increase?
I think the latter. I think we're going forward with understanding of establishing a service. We do have a little bit of capital works, but by no means is it anything major. I think we'd look to community works funds for that. But as a cost of living standard, I think we work with each community hall in the future as we do now, and they would submit their grant and aid. I don't think we're looking to provide a large sum of monies at this point to every community hall. We're rather looking to provide a stable, consistent service. And it's up to the community halls to approach us for their individual needs. And then for us to consider that through our budget process here.
So that'll be part of the process, reach out to.
That would be part of the process moving forward after this is established, I think
after it's established.
Yeah.
Okay, and the other thing was, I know when Black Creek, because they had their own local service area and their own tax requisition, that at one point they wanted to know if they could get, wasn't it like $500 or something to get frames for some of the Pioneer pictures they were going to put on their wall. I remember that Beth Dunlop said they weren't eligible for any grant and aid from Area C because they already had that established service. Do you know if that holds true? Would that be a question to Mariah? I mean, for special events, special things where it's over and above, like Merville just had its 100th anniversary, right? And for the association. So things like that. Is there any flexibility there for, say, a small grant and aid over and above their tax requisition?
I think that was the intention of the rural community grant, was for those one-time events. But if you're, I'd have to defer to Mariah to get back with you on more information. If
you don't need to answer now, just a query.
I think what this is doing is it's combining all the community halls into a single service, right? And we will develop an ability to tax on the basis of the needs of all of them. That will provide some breathing room to you, but ultimately it will be up to each hall to bring forward their financial plan for your approval, right? And as to how you will support it, and there will be breathing room there for special projects. And the other thing is in terms of like any other service, you have the ability to increase the requisition limits every once in a while as well, to provide for growth or otherwise if needs are going to be more in the future.
Another question, if I may.
Yeah.
The Odd Fellows Hall. What's so odd about the Odd Fellows Hall that they never apply for any money from the regional district? And that's in Area B, right across from Sloan School.
Oh, the Grantham, like the Grantham.
Grantham Hall.
That's, I was going to ask about that. So
Yeah.
yes, please. Yeah.
Are they aware that there may be some funding available? Because it looks to me like they need a real, really need a new roof pretty soon.
I'm not aware that they actually perform too many activities in that hall at this stage. I'm not sure how much they actually do. They haven't attended any of our Zoom meetings. So I can reach out to them after this process, and they might be a latecomer in the process. They also haven't really shown up on the grant and aid.
No, not at all.
Necessary. So for a large part, it is possible that that hall could be considered in the future as a community hall. And if they reach out to us for need, but for the most part, yeah, they've been largely, I wouldn't say excluded from the process, but just have not been involved in the process.
And of course, very similar to our meeting with the Black Creek Old Age Pensioner Association that have taken over the Hobby Hall, and they're not getting any younger. So, they might need something. The very last one, and I'm sorry to take up, but now I'm not the chair, so I can just.
Go ahead.
The last one is cutting off the requisition at the Punish River. I don't know the Arden Road Residents Association, when they have a meeting, it's usually not in the city of Courtenay. They usually have it at the Arden School. So I just wonder. I mean, Area C gives probably half of all its tax dollars ends up in the city of Courtenay anyway. So maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing to be supporting establishments in Area C, even if you are south of that magical line. And I also allude to the fact that a previous prime minister who is, I think, working on voter suppression, told all the Arden Road Association they had to go to Dove Creek Hall to vote one federal election. So, little tidbit there. So I'm just wondering, I wouldn't be adverse to not exempting any of the areas. I don't know about my colleague in Area B, but certainly, like I say, the tax dollars that flows from the country to the city is enormous anyway. So why not have some flow back to the country? Thank you.
Okay.
Did you want to reply? Doug?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Thank you, Chair. I just encourage if you were feeling that way, to let us know sooner than later, as the February AAP report will be coming up, and we'll have that as an exemption. It was just a staff recommendation. There was no real, there's background thought behind it, but no real background communication. So this would be the meeting to determine that in.
Can I just ask a question of you, Doug? And that is, if we raise monies, is it specifically for the halls identified, or could it be for other hall or potential use of an area that's not necessarily covered by those that it's intended for?
I think our intention with establishment of the bylaw is not to specifically identify the halls, only that they be in the rural electoral areas.
Great. Thank you. That does help, because I was going to ask about the Grantham Hall, because Area B doesn't really have any distinct halls except that one. And for now, I think I do agree with the exemption of the residents in Area B south of Ryan Road, because generally I think they use Comox instead of the rural areas. But if a hall or a church would churches qualify, or is it because they're a religious institution, they don't kind of count as a rural hall? I'm trying to think, in that area of Lazo, we don't really have a lot of community sort of halls. So maybe that question.
As far as churches qualifying, we do not envision that to be the case. They perform their own function,
Right.
and provide their own community
Okay.
outreach. But a church could be converted down the road. But
Okay, thank you. My only other question was, it does sound like, so the establishment of the service is not necessarily that halls will have this standing amount of money that they will be getting every year, that they do have to apply. Is that I'm just confirming that's the case?
the standing amount of money would be the basis of which we might look at an operational agreement. So it might be a 5-year operational agreement, and then they
Okay.
would not have to apply every year. It
Okay.
Just that'd be our long-term outcome.
Okay.
and then look at that individually.
If that's the case, if I can just sort of ask staff to look into what they're going to require the halls in terms of financial reporting. I know most of the halls are run by volunteers, and time and capacity is maybe not always available. And yeah, I just heard a few concerns from the community about proper financial reporting, that the funds that, if this is going to be public dollars, especially locally raised dollars, going into these halls, that that they're used for the intended purposes, and that the RD, the reports that come back, show how the funds were used. So is that something staff have just taken into account, or are you considering how you'll work with the halls?
Yeah, we've taken that into account, and if we do enter into an operational agreement, typically it's a notice to reader and operational clause, which would be the basic financial looping. But if for some reason it was a larger project, or they had a much larger request, or something happened in the future, then there might be a different approach. But that tends to be our very basic need.
I have a question from Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. I think I take a lot of comfort in how the CVRD staff has handled existing hall contracts, knowing the ones on Hornby and Denman fairly well. The requirements for audited statements, all that stuff is already all in place. And I think it's, even with volunteer organizations, it's working pretty well. My only maybe last comment was just when you think about we'll start with the requisition. I support what's being suggested, but for the area A1, it's if we can think about a slightly higher maximum requisition. I just wonder, because we already know what, for example, the Hornby Hall is getting a fair chunk of coin. I think they're getting 50,000 a year or something like that, and I don't expect that the other halls are going to get to those levels, but just to leave us plenty of breathing room in case the communities do desire to have a higher level of service, or maybe we lower the service level elsewhere. I don't know, but I know those conversations, people will start looking across each other over time. Thank you.
Director Reid?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to amplify the concerns about a notice of reader or some kind of a reporting mechanism. I know it can be difficult for the looser organizations out there, but they're all pretty well nonprofits. So they're societies, so they have to do some kind of audit or notice to reader anyway every year. So that should be part of it. And also, I think by showing that we are interested, that we are trying to support the local community halls, that perhaps it will spark more interest in the community, and maybe bring some of the younger people in that need to come in, and this way they have some stable funding, and they can maybe put together some programs, apply for some grants from senior government, what have you. So I think it's all really good, and I am concerned that maybe we're not putting enough in this function right off the bat, and maybe we should make it considerable so that it gets everybody's attention. After all, it's their own money coming back to them.
Okay, so I note that a couple of directors have mentioned the level of service, or the financial amount going to the service. Do staff need any other clarification on that?
I think unless Mariah needs more clarification, we can take that into context, and when we come back with the AAP in February, we'll be able to give you some more options around financing.
Great. All right, thank you. So no more questions. I will call the question on receipt. All in favor? Right, and we have a recommendation. Moved and seconded that the board support the electoral area's community hall service project as outlined in the staff report dated January 7th, and further that staff be directed to bring forward the necessary service establishment bylaws and related logistics for consideration of readings and inclusion with the singular alternative approval process to seek participating area approval. All in favor? And that's carried. Great. Thanks again, staff. Thanks, Doug. Moving on, we have Jackson Drive Sewer Service Parcel Tax Amendment for receipt. Moved, seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And there's two reports, Jackson Drive, and that will be followed by King Coho, and Derry Monteith will provide an introduction to both and answer your questions.
Thanks,
One
welcome.
at a time.
Welcome, Derry.
Thank you. Through the chair. So in front of you this morning is a proposed amendment to the parcel tax bylaw for the Jackson Drive sewer service. The parcel tax for this service is to be reviewed at least every 5 years, ensuring review of the Jackson Drive Asset Management Plan at the same time. And the last review of this bylaw was in 2016. So this amendment in front of you is recommended to align with the financial requirements outlined in the proposed 2021 to 2025 financial plan. The proposed financial plan for this service includes a 2021 parcel tax rate of $1,066, which is unchanged from the adopted financial plan and also consistent with the 2020 parcel tax rate. The proposed financial plan also includes an approximate 4% increase in the parcel tax rate in years 2022 through 2025 to ensure that adequate reserves are being collected to meet the requirements of the Jackson Drive Asset Management Plan. And we will be providing more fulsome information on the proposed financial plan as part of the financial plan presentation at the February 8th meeting. And with that, I'll take any questions.
I don't see any other questions. Since it's in Area B, I just want to double check how will residents of Jackson Drive be informed, or does this just come with their regular tax requisition?
Yeah, it comes with their regular tax requisition,
Okay.
and I think because there's no change this year, we likely won't put out a newsletter.
Okay, thank you. All right, so seeing no questions on receipt, all those in favor? Any opposed? Great. And the recommendation that the board consider giving readings to bylaw number 630, Jackson Drive Sewer Service Parcel Tax Bylaw number 2749, amendment number 5 as attached to the staff report dated January 8th, 2021. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. And moving on to King Coho Waste Service Parcel Tax Amendment, back to Derry. Moved and seconded.
Thank you, through the chair. So the 2020 to 2024 financial plan for the King Coho wastewater service included a 2020 parcel tax rate of $1,786.41, and that was to increase to $1,968.38 in 2021. So we're proposing an amendment to the parcel tax bylaw for 2021 to align with the requirements outlined in the proposed financial plan, which keeps the 2021 parcel tax rate consistent with the 2020 rate. And once the capital upgrade project for this service is completed in early 2021, we will also be taking another look at the asset management planning for this service, which could impact parcel tax rates in future years. And again, we'll be providing more information on the proposed financial plan as part of the financial plan presentation at the February 8th meeting.
Question from Director Green.
Oh my gosh, no wonder we get such a bad name out there, eh? With the water services that we have to take over and the sewer services we have to take over. But I guess if there's any consolation in Jackson Drive, you can always point to Coho, say, well, look, you think you got it bad. Look at those guys, $2,000 a year.
Yeah.
But obviously this is paying for some capital upgrades. So there's an end date to it, is there not? This isn't just operations of the system.
Through the chair, so a large portion of the requisition for the King Coho service does go to reserve contributions. However, because the service came to us with no capital reserves, the rates will likely remain as they are into the future as we continue to build the reserves.
Yeah.
So any further questions, Director Reed?
No, just the oh hum. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And just a question to Derry. Compared to the Jackson Drive, is the bylaw there? It's listed every 5 years. This one's just every year. I guess we amend. Is there a way to, like, I'm just wondering if, what the reason was behind the two, and is there a way to do it on a 5-year basis?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. So following the capital upgrades, the plan is to amend the bylaw to reflect a 5-year period. But I think until then, and until we kind of review the reserves and the asset management plan following that work, it'll be,
Okay.
yeah, things might change a little.
All right, thank you. Well, seeing no further questions, all in favor of receipt? Any opposed? And the recommendation? Thank you. Moved. Seconded. I think I saw a finger by Director Grief. All in favor? Any opposed? And that's carried. Great, thank you. So I don't think we have any more new business. Moved termination, seconded. All in favor? Carried. Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for the inaugural meeting of 2020. Oh gosh, you just cursed us.